Rain in Asheville that morning came down in sheets so heavy I couldn't see the headstone 3 feet in front of me. 43 years of marriage to Catherine, and I was burying her in a downpour that felt like the sky itself was grieving harder than our own sun could manage. My name is Walter Brennan. I'm 67 years old. I built Brennan and Sons Construction from a single pickup truck and a borrowed cement mixer back in 1981. And by the time Catherine got sick last spring, we had 42 employees, 3 commercial contracts with the city, and a reputation in Western North Carolina that meant something. Catherine kept the books for the first 20 years. She raised our boy Daniel while I was out pouring foundations in 90-degree heat. She made our life possible, and our son didn't even cry at her funeral. I noticed it because I was watching him, not on purpose. A father just watches his son sometimes, the way you used to watch him sleep when he was small. Daniel stood there next to his wife Brittany, both of them under that black umbrella she'd insisted on, and his face was as flat as wet pavement. Brittany kept checking her phone 3 times during the eulogy. I counted. After the service, when the last of Catherine's church friends had hugged me and pressed casseroles into my hands, my daughter-in-law walked over to me at the gravesite. The rain had finally let up. Brittany was 41 years old, blonde, expensive-looking in a way that made me think of my mother's word for it, showy. She had married Daniel 6 years ago after a whirlwind 9-month courtship Catherine had warned me about and I had ignored. She put her hand on my arm. Not gently, possessively, like a real estate agent showing a property she already owned. Dad, she said. She always called me Dad. Catherine had hated that. We need to talk about the company. Soon. Daniel and I have been thinking, and with Mom gone, things are going to need to change. I stared at her. My wife wasn't even in the ground a full hour. The dirt on the casket was still dark with rain. Brittany, I said, we just buried Catherine. I know, she said. I'm just being practical. You're going to need help now. You can't run that company alone at your age. My age. I was 67, not 97. I was on the job site at 6 a.m., 4 days a week. I'd run a marathon in Charlotte 2 years ago. But I just nodded, because I didn't have it in me to fight her standing over Catherine's grave. I should have fought her then. I should have fought her in the parking lot of First Methodist when she rolled her eyes during the pastor's prayer. I should have fought her 3 years ago when she convinced Daniel to take a consulting role at Brennan and Sons that mostly consisted of him showing up at noon in golf shirts. But Catherine was the fighter in our family. I was the builder. And without her, I felt like a man trying to swing a hammer with a broken arm. The first week after the funeral, I barely got out of bed. The second week, I started going back to the office, mostly to escape the silence of our house in Biltmore Forest. That was when Brittany started showing up. She had a key somehow. I never figured out how. She'd let herself into my office at the construction yard around 10 in the morning, carrying 2 coffees and a folder, and she'd sit across from me and start talking about transition planning. Dad, I've been talking to a friend at Wells Fargo. He says we should really think about restructuring the ownership while you're still healthy enough to make the decisions. God forbid something happens, but if you had a stroke tomorrow, the estate tax alone would wipe Daniel out. I'd hear her say things like that and think, would it though? I had a will. Catherine and I had set it up properly with a tax attorney out of Charlotte 10 years ago. A trust structure, life insurance, the whole thing. Daniel would inherit everything cleanly when I died. Brittany knew this because she'd asked. What she didn't like was that the trust had clauses. Spousal protection clauses. If Daniel and Brittany ever divorced, she got nothing from the company. Catherine had insisted on that, back when Brittany was still pretending to like her. Sweetheart, I'd say, I'm not transferring the business. Not yet. I'm going to work for a few more years. She'd smile. That smile. I started to recognize it, tight at the corners of the mouth, but the eyes never moved, like a piece of plastic furniture pretending to be wood. Dad, she'd say. Of course, whatever you think is best. Then she'd go home, and the next thing I knew, my son would call me. Pop, listen, Britt and I were talking. We're worried about you. Mom's death really hit you hard. Maybe you should see somebody. The grief, you know. I started keeping notes, just on a yellow legal's pad in my desk drawer at home. Dates and times. Things Brittany said. Things Daniel parroted 3 days later. I'd been in the construction business for 46 years. I knew when somebody was building a foundation under me, and I knew it wasn't a foundation meant to hold me up. Around the end of June, about 10 weeks after the funeral, Brittany came over for what she called a family dinner. She brought their daughter Madison, who was 4. Madison was the only good thing that had come out of that marriage as far as I could tell. A sweet, quiet little girl who liked when I made her grilled cheese cut into triangles. Catherine had adored her. The night Catherine died in the hospice, Madison had been the last person besides me to hold her hand. That night, after Madison was asleep on the couch, Brittany pulled out a folder. Of course she had a folder. She always had a folder. She always had a folder. Dad, we need to talk about something serious. Daniel wouldn't look at me. He was studying his fork like it had instructions printed on it. Okay, I said. Madison's going to need things. Private school, eventually college. We've been doing the math, and with what daycare costs now, plus our mortgage. She slid the folder across the table. It was a power of attorney. Financial, healthcare, everything, with her name on it. Not Daniel's. Hers. What is this, Brittany? Dad, please don't get upset. It's just a precaution. With your age and the stress of losing mom, your doctor said cognitive decline can. What doctor? Excuse me. What doctor said that? Because I haven't seen a doctor since my physical in March, and Dr. Patel didn't say one word about cognitive decline. She blinked. For just a half second, she didn't have her answer ready. Then it came. Daniel and I have been talking to a specialist, just about general concerns. Nothing's diagnosed yet, but we want to be ready. I looked at my son, who I'd taught to throw a curveball, who I'd put through big forest, who I'd given a job to even when I knew he wasn't going to be the one to take over the business. Daniel, I said, look at me. He looked up. His eyes were Catherine's eyes. That was the worst part. Do you think I have cognitive decline, son? He hesitated. He actually hesitated. Pop, I just think we just want to make sure. Get out of my house. Brittany started to say something. I held up my hand. Both of you, Dick Madison. Get out. I'll see you when I'm ready. They left. Brittany was already on her phone before they got to the car. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after they were gone. I looked at Catherine's chair. I think I cried. I don't remember exactly. I remember pouring a bourbon I didn't drink and then pouring it back into the bottle. The next morning, I called Ruben Castellano. Ruben had been my attorney for 31 years. He'd handled the lawsuit when a subcontractor tried to sue us in '97. He'd handled my mother's estate. He'd handled the trust documents Catherine and I set up. He was 71 years old, semi-retired, and he picked up his cell phone on the second ring. Walter, how you holding up, brother? Ruben, I need to come see you, today if you can. What's going on? I told him. The whole thing. The funeral, the visits, the folder, the power of attorney. He was quiet the whole time. When I finished, he said, You free at 2? I drove to his office in downtown Asheville. Ruben had the same office he'd had since 1994. Second floor over a coffee shop on Patton Avenue, with the same green carpet and the same framed photo of him fishing with his late father in the Outer Banks. He poured us both coffee and listened again, this time with a notepad. When I was done, he said, Walter, I want to ask you a hard question. Go ahead. Has it occurred to you that this might not just be about money? What do you mean? I mean, this is moving fast. Catherine's been gone less than 3 months, and they're already pushing for power of attorney. There's something underneath all this. Have you looked at the company books recently? I hadn't. Not closely. I'd been grieving. Daniel had been managing operations for the last 18 months while Catherine was sick. I trusted him. You should look, Ruben said. Quietly. Don't tell him you're looking. I drove to the office Saturday morning when nobody was there. I let myself into the records room. I pulled the QuickBooks files. I pulled the bank statements. I pulled the petty cash logs. I sat at my desk for 9 hours straight, and what I found made me physically sick. There was about $360,000 missing. Not in one chunk. That would have been too obvious. It was in pieces. Vendor payments to companies I didn't recognize. Consulting fees paid to LLCs registered in Delaware. Equipment purchases for jobs that never existed. The pattern was sloppy in places, slick in others. Someone had been doing this for at least a year and a half, maybe longer. I called Ruben from my desk at 9 o'clock that Saturday night. It's worse than I thought, I said. Don't move anything yet, he said. Don't change a single thing. Don't even change the locks. We need to do this right. What followed was the strangest 2 months of my life. I went to work every morning and pretended nothing was wrong. I let Daniel sit in his office and play on his phone. I smiled at Brittany when she called. When she came over on Sundays with Madison, I made grilled cheese triangles and listened to her talk about needing a new car. I even let her drive me to one doctor's appointment, where she tried to lead me into saying I'd been forgetting things, and I obediently mumbled about misplacing my keys. She was buying it. Both of them were. I could see it in their faces, the slow, smug confidence of people who think they're winning a chess game against an opponent who doesn't know the rules. Meanwhile, Ruben and I were walking with a forensic accountant out of Charlotte named Sandra Lefkowitz, who came highly recommended and charged me $300 an hour and was worth every penny. We had a private investigator photograph, Brittany getting into a hotel in Greenville with a man who turned out to be the regional sales rep for a paving company we'd been doing business with for 2 years. The same paving company that, it turned out, had been overbilling us by about 30% on every job since 2022. Daniel didn't know about the affair. Daniel, my son, was being played by his own wife. Brittany had been skimming with help from her boyfriend, and Daniel had been her useful idiot, signing off on invoices he didn't read because Brittany told him not to worry about it. In some ways, that broke my heart more than the theft. Daniel wasn't a criminal mastermind. Daniel was just weak. I thought about Catherine a lot during those weeks. What she would have done. She would have been more merciful than me, probably. She always was. But she also would have been furious. I held on to that. There was one more thing. Something I hadn't told Ruben yet, because I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Catherine and I had a godson. His name was Eli Ramirez. He was 34 years old. Eli's father, Hector, had worked for me for 26 years. He'd been my second in command. He taught me everything I knew about concrete pours. When Hector died of a heart attack on a job site in 2009, he'd left behind a wife and a 16-year-old son. Catherine and I helped Maria Ramirez through the funeral, helped her keep the house, helped Eli get through the rest of high school and into NC State on a partial scholarship, plus whatever we could quietly cover. Eli became an engineer, a good one. He worked for a firm in Raleigh now, structural engineering, the kind of work that requires you to be smart and careful and humble all at once. He called me every other Sunday. He had called me every single day for 2 weeks after Catherine died. He'd flown in for the funeral and stayed at our house and made me eat breakfast when I didn't want to. He'd held my hand at the gravesite. He was the one who'd cried. I had never told Eli that Catherine and I, in our trust, had set aside a specific provision for him, a scholarship fund in Hector's name, plus a personal gift to him on our deaths. Catherine had insisted on it. He's our boy too, Walter, she'd said, in all the ways that count. I called Eli on a Wednesday in mid-September. Eli, it's Walter. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always, sir. If I asked you to come work for me, to come run Brennan Sons with me, eventually take it over, would you do it? There was a long pause. Sir, I have a job. I have a life in Raleigh. I know. Why are you asking me this? I told him most of it, not all. I didn't want to put him in a position of knowing things he'd have to lie about. But enough. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, Mr. Brennan, I'd need to think about it and talk to my wife. But yes, I think yes. Take your time, I said. And Eli, whatever you decide, come up here in 3 weeks. I'm having a meeting. I'd like you in the room. He came. So did Ruben. So did Sandra Lefkowitz. So did a detective named Greg Mooney from the Buncombe County Financial Crimes Division, a man Ruben had quietly briefed 2 weeks earlier. I told Brittany and Daniel it was a family meeting about the future of the company. I asked them to come to the office on a Saturday at 1 in the afternoon. I told Brittany to dress nicely because we'd be photographed for a newsletter. She dressed nicely. She wore a cream-colored suit. She brought Madison, which I hadn't asked her to do, and which made me sad, and which I quietly handed off to my secretary Linda with $20 and instructions to take her for ice cream at the place down the street. Then I closed the conference room door. Sit down, I said. Daniel and Brittany sat on one side of the long table. Ruben sat next to me. Sandra was at the end with her laptop open. Detective Mooney was behind her in a gray jacket, not introduced yet. Eli was sitting against the back wall, quiet, his hands folded. Brittany was the first to speak. She always was. Dad, what's going on? Who are these people? You'll know in a minute, I said. Brittany, I want to start by thanking you. For what? for being so patient with me these last few months. With my, what did you call it? My cognitive decline. You really tried hard to look out for me. I appreciate it. She smiled. That smile. Of course, Dad. We love you. So, I have something to share with you both about the future of Brennan and Sons. I slid a folder across the table to Daniel. He opened it. It was a printout. The first page was a summary of the missing funds, with a total at the bottom in red. 364,000 and change. The second page was a list of the Shell LLCs. The third page was bank records. The fourth page was a photograph of Brittany kissing a man named Trevor Halsey in the parking lot of a Hampton Inn in Greenville. Daniel made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was more like the sound a man makes when he steps off a curb he didn't see. Brittany's face did something interesting. The smile didn't disappear all at once. It collapsed in stages, first the eyes, then the mouth, then the color in her cheeks. This is a misunderstanding, she said. These records are wrong. Daniel tell him these are wrong. Daniel didn't tell him these are wrong. Daniel didn't tell me anything. He was looking at the photograph. His hands were shaking. Trevor, Daniel said. Trev, from the paving company. Daniel, listen to me. You said you were at your sister's. Daniel, listen. I tapped the table. Brittany, you came into my house. You sat at my wife's kitchen table. Brittany, you came into my house. You sat at my wife's kitchen table. You tried to take power of attorney over me 3 months after Catherine died. You tried to push me out of my own company so you could keep stealing from it without supervision. You used your husband, my son, as a shield. You used my granddaughter as leverage, and you smiled while you did it. I leaned forward. I am not the one with cognitive decline. Detective Mooney stepped forward. Mrs. Brennan, my name is Detective Greg Mooney with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. I'm not here to arrest you today, but I am here to inform you that an investigation has been opened, and I'd suggest you consult with an attorney before this evening. She sat there for a full 30 seconds without saying anything. Then she stood up and walked out. Just like that. She didn't even look at Daniel. She got into her car and drove away, and that was the last time my granddaughter Madison would see her mother for almost 6 months. Daniel was crying. Real tears now. Funny how that works. Pop, Pop, I didn't know. I didn't know about Trevor. I didn't know about the money. I just signed what she told me to sign. I know, son. I'm so sorry, Pop. I'm so sorry about Mom. I'm so sorry, Daniel. He stopped. You're going to lose your job here. You're going to lose your shares. You're going to have to rebuild your life. And you're going to have to do it without Brennan and Sons. Because a man who signs documents he doesn't read is a man who can't be trusted with a company. Your mother and I built this thing for 40 years. Pop, please. But you're going to keep your daughter. And you're going to be a father to her. A real one. And in 5 years, if you put your life back together, if you've gotten yourself a job and a therapist and a sense of who you actually are, we'll talk again. About a relationship. Not about the company. About being my son. He nodded. He couldn't speak. I turned to Eli. Ellie, stand up. Come here. He stood. He walked over to my chair. I stood up too, and I put my hand on his shoulder, and I turned him toward Ruben and Sandra and the empty chair where Brittany had sat. This is Eli Ramirez. He's my godson. He's the son of Hector Ramirez, who built this company alongside me for 26 years. Eli has a master's degree in structural engineering. He's accepted my offer to come on as vice president of operations, effective the first of the month. In 2 years, when I retire, he'll be the president of Brennan and Sons. I turned back to Daniel. He's not your replacement, son. He's nobody's replacement. He's just the man for the job. Your mother loved him too. She'd be proud. Daniel nodded. He surprised me then. He stood up, and he walked over to Eli, and he hugged him. He said something to Eli I couldn't hear, but Eli's eyes filled up, and he hugged Daniel back. I want to tell you the rest happened quickly, but it didn't. Nothing happens quickly when you're rebuilding. Brittany was charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and a few other things I didn't follow closely. Trevor Halsey was charged too. They both took plea deals. Brittany did 14 months in a low-security facility in Ardison, West Virginia. She filed for divorce from inside. Daniel didn't fight it. Daniel moved into a small rental house 10 minutes from me. He went to therapy twice a week. He got a job selling materials for a lumber yard, where he worked his way up to assistant manager over the course of 2 years. He picked Madison up from preschool every day. On Sundays, he brought her over to my house and we made grilled cheese triangles. And sometimes I caught him crying quietly in the kitchen, and I let him. Grief has its own schedule. Eli moved to Asheville with his wife Camila and their two boys. He bought a house in West Asheville. He came to work at 6 in the morning, the same hour I did, and he listened more than he talked, the way his father had. The 42 employees of Brennan and Sons took to him faster than I dared hope. By the end of his first year, 3 of our oldest foremen told me privately they thought he was the best thing that had happened to the company since 1985. I officially retired on my 71st birthday. Eli took over as president. We had a party at the construction yard. Daniel was there. So was Madison, who was 8 by then, in a green dress holding her cousin's hand. Catherine wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. But I'll tell you something. The morning of the retirement party, I drove out to the cemetery in Asheville before anyone was up. I sat on the wet grass next to her stone and I told her everything. About Brittany. About Daniel. About Eli. About Madison growing up to look just like her grandmother. I told her about the company being safe and the family being smaller, but more honest than it had been in years. I sat there for an hour. The sun came up over the Blue Ridge. I don't know if she heard me. I'm a builder, not a believer in much beyond what I can put my hands on. But I'll tell you this. When I stood up to leave, I felt lighter than I had since the day she died. Like she'd been waiting to hear it. That she'd known all along that the man she married wasn't going to let our boy be eaten alive by a wolf in cream-colored suits, and wasn't going to let our company be carved up, and wasn't going to forget the boy we'd promised to look after, the one whose father had given his life to the work we built together. I drove home. I made coffee. I waited for my son and my granddaughter to arrive. And then we went to the party, the three of us, and we built the next part of the life we still had left. I think about Catherine almost every morning now, when the coffee's brewing and the house is quiet. I think about what she would have said about all of this, and I think she would have said something simple. She always cut to the bone of a thing. She would have said that people show you who they are, and the only real mistake is refusing to look. Brittany showed me who she was the day of the funeral, when she put her hand on my arm at the gravesite and started talking about the company before the dirt had settled. I saw it. I felt it in my stomach. And I told myself I was being uncharitable, that I was a grieving old man imagining slights. That refusal to look almost cost me everything we'd built. Here's what I've come to understand about evil, and I don't use that word lightly. Evil isn't loud. It doesn't show up wearing a black hat. It shows up in clean-colored suits, carrying coffee, asking how your blood pressure is. It uses kindness as a crowbar. The reason Brittany got as far as she did was because she counted on my grief making me weak, and on my love for my son making me blind. She was right about the first thing. She was wrong about the second. I want to say something to anyone listening who's older, who's lost someone, who's wondering if it's worth fighting back when the people who should love you start circling like they're divvying up an estate. It is worth it. Not for you. For the people who depended on you to be the one who stayed sharp. Hector Ramirez gave 26 years of his working life to me, and his son Eli was owed a future I had quietly promised to provide. If I had rolled over for Brittany, I would have stolen that future from a young man who'd done nothing but love my family. My weakness would have become his loss. That's what I mean about consequences. They never stop with you. The hardest part wasn't catching Brittany. The hardest part was looking at my own son and admitting he was not the man I had hoped he would be. Daniel signed papers he didn't read because he didn't want to do the hard work of being awake to his own life. That's a small evil too, in its way. Cowardice is the soil that fraud grows in. I love him. I'll always love him. But I had to let him face the cost of being asleep because the only road back to being a real father to Madison ran through that pain. If I've learned anything in 67 years, it's that integrity isn't a feeling. It's a habit. You build it the way you build a foundation, one careful pour at a time, and when the storm comes, that's what stands. Catherine knew that. She built me in a lot of ways. I just hope I was paying enough attention to pass it on.